daughter of a warrior to slave in a single breath. That's all it took for Freda's world to shatter. The moment her father's heart stopped beating, every promise of protection died with him. Torn from the only life she knew, thrown into thrall quarters where hope goes to rot, she learned the cruelest truth. In the Viking world, a woman with no claim to her father's name has no claim to her own future. But when a powerful leader appears at her master's door with an impossible proposal, Freda faces a choice that will either save her or destroy her completely. Eric the Iron-Bearded doesn't make mistakes. He's the man who negotiates when others draw swords, who builds empires through strategy instead of bloodshed. So why would he offer marriage to a bastard thrall covered in fish scales? Why would he risk his reputation, his alliances, everything he's built, for a woman he met mere hours ago? The answer lies buried in a raid 22 years past, in guilt that's been eating him alive, and in secrets that could ignite a war between two peoples who've been enemies for generations. But there's something Eric isn't telling her. Something about the night her mother was captured. Something about why he remembers her mother's name when he should have forgotten it decades ago. And when Freda discovers the truth, she'll have to decide, is this marriage salvation or the most elaborate trap ever set? Because the man offering her freedom might be the same man who destroyed her mother's life, and loving him might be the most dangerous choice she'll ever make. The day Freda's father died, she learned that protection was not inheritance. It was breath, and when breath stopped, so did every promise that kept her standing upright in a world designed to crush girls like her. She was scrubbing blood from her father's tunic when they came for her, the fabric still warm, her fingers still trembling. The wound that killed him had been deep, straight through the ribs, and she'd held his hand while he choked on his final words. Not her name, not comfort, just tactical instructions to men who would survive him. She was 22 years old, and in the span of a single morning, she had gone from invisible daughter to something worse. Property. Ingrid was the one who grabbed her braid first, thick fingers yanking hard enough that Freda's scalp burned. The woman had always hated her. That specific kind of hatred reserved for those who exist as constant reminder of husband's failings. Freda's father had taken Ingrid as wife 3 winters after capturing Freda's mother on an Irish shore. The marriage was strategy, the hatred was personal. Your sleeping place is with the thralls now, Ingrid said, and there was satisfaction in her voice so pure it made Freda's stomach turn. You'll work the kitchens. Gutting fish suits you better than pretending to be one of us. Freda didn't fight. Fighting would have given Ingrid the pleasure of watching her break. Instead, she stood perfectly still, chin level, eyes forward. It was her mother who had taught her that. Dignity costs nothing. It cannot be taken unless you surrender it. Easy words, brutal practice. They stripped her of the woolen dress her father had permitted her to wear, replaced it with rough-spun thrall clothing that scratched her skin raw. The bronze armband she'd worn since childhood, a gift from her father during a moment of softness he'd probably regretted later, was yanked from her arm. Ingrid held it up to the firelight, examining it like evidence of theft. This belongs to the household now. Thralls don't wear bronze. The sleeping quarters for enslaved people smelled like unwashed bodies and hopelessness. Straw pallets on packed earth. No fire pit. Drafts that cut through gaps in the walls. Freda found a corner spot and sat down slowly, carefully, maintaining the posture her mother had drilled into her. Even here, especially here, a woman across from her, maybe 40, winters old with scars crossing her forearms, watched her with knowing eyes. "You're the bastard daughter," she said in accented Norse. Irish accent. Freda's heart clenched. "I am Freda," she replied, then switched to Gaelic. The words felt like coming home to a house burned down years ago. "And you?" The woman's expression shifted, softened at the edges. "Deirdre. I was taken from Dublin 16 winters past. Your mother, she was from the southern kingdoms, yes?" Freda nodded. Her throat was too tight for words. "I heard her sometimes, singing while she worked. She had a voice like rivers." Deirdre leaned forward. "She never stopped teaching you the old tongue, did she? Even when it was dangerous?" She said forgetting your first language is forgetting your first breath. Freda's eyes burned, but she refused the tears. She died when I was 14. And your father kept you safe until today. It wasn't a question. Deirdre tilted her head, studying her. Now you learn what your mother learned. That safety was always conditional. That we are never truly standing on solid ground. The first week was designed to break her. Freda understood that with cold clarity. Ingrid assigned her the worst tasks. Gutting fish until her hands bled. Scrubbing pots with sand and ash until her knuckles cracked open. Hauling water from the stream in winter cold that made her bones ache. Every night she collapsed onto her straw pallet, and every morning she rose before dawn. But she didn't break. She learned instead. Learned that thralls had their own language of survival. Learned which overseers could be reasoned with and which ones enjoyed cruelty too much for negotiation. Learned that Deirdre and 3 other Irish women formed a tight circle of protection, and they were slowly, carefully, pulling Freda into it. You speak both tongues, Deirdre said one night, voice low beneath the sound of wind battering the walls. That's rare, valuable. Valuable to who? Freda kept her voice equally quiet. I'm thrall now. My value is in how quickly I can gut a cod. Your father's household, yes, but the world is larger than one longhouse. Deirdre's eyes glinted in the darkness. Trade season comes in 3 months. Ships from Ireland, from the Frankish lands, from places east where the rivers run backwards. Merchants who need translators, who pay well for those who can negotiate in multiple tongues. Freda felt something stir in her chest. Not hope exactly. Hope was too dangerous. But maybe it's harder, sharper cousin. Possibility. The assembly came on the first day of the thaw. Freda was carrying water when she heard the commotion. Voices raised in the great hall, formal and tense. She shouldn't have stopped. Thralls who lingered near conversations above their station got beaten. But she heard her father's name spoken, and her feet refused to move. The alliance must hold, a voice said, deep and measured. Unfamiliar. Your husband's death changes nothing. About the threat we face. Ragnar's clan moves south. If we don't stand united, we'll be picked off one by one. My sons will honor their father's commitments, Ingrid replied, and Freda could hear the steel beneath the diplomatic words. When they are old enough to lead. Your sons are 12 and 9 winters. The unfamiliar voice wasn't cruel, just factual. By the time they can lead, Ragnar will have consumed half our territories. Freda shifted slightly, trying to see through the gap in the door. She caught a glimpse of broad shoulders, dark hair streaked with early silver, a beard braided with bronze rings. The man stood like someone comfortable with command, but tired of exercising it. Then what do you propose, Eric Barba de Ferro? Ingrid's voice dripped poisonous honey. Eric. Freda knew the name. Everyone did. Eric the Iron-Bearded, who had negotiated peace where others brought only swords, who had lost his wife in childbirth 2 winters past and refused every marriage. Proposal since, who was said to be half mad with grief or half wise with strategy, depending on who told the story. I propose we strengthen bonds through other means, Eric said. Trade, shared defense, practical arrangements that don't require your children to grow up faster than childhood allows. The conversation continued, but Freda stopped hearing it. Her arms were shaking from holding the water buckets. She needed to move before someone noticed her eavesdropping. But as she turned, her foot caught on uneven ground. Water sloshed. The bucket handle creaked. The door opened. Eric stood there, looking down at her. His eyes were gray like winter seas, and they took her in with unsettling thoroughness. Not the way men looked at thralls they wanted to use. Different. Assessing. You speak Irish, he said. Not a question. Freda's heart hammered. Yes, Lord. How well? She switched languages, keeping her voice steady. Well enough to translate trade agreements. Well enough to catch when someone is lying in either tongue. Something flickered across Eric's face. He studied her for 3 heartbeats that felt like 3 hours. Then he turned back into the hall, leaving the door open behind him. Ingrid, he said, and his voice carried a note of finality that made Freda's skin prickle. I have a proposal after all. Freda wasn't allowed inside the hall for the negotiation. Thralls didn't witness the bartering of their own futures. She was sent back to the kitchens with trembling hands and a mind that wouldn't stop racing. The water buckets felt heavier than before, or maybe it was just the weight of Eric's gray eyes still pressing against her thoughts. Deirdre found her an hour later, hands deep in fish guts, moving on pure instinct while her brain spun uselessly. You're cutting wrong, Deirdre said quietly, taking the knife from Freda's fingers before she could slice herself open. Whatever happened out there, it's eating you from the inside. Freda told her the conversation she'd overheard, Eric's sudden interest, the way he'd looked at her like she was a puzzle he was already 3 moves into solving. Deirdre's scarred hands stilled on the fish. Eric Barbadifero asked about you specifically? He asked if I spoke Irish. Then he went back inside and said he had a proposal. Freda's voice cracked at the edges. What does that mean? It means, Deirdre said slowly, carefully, that you caught the attention of a man who doesn't do anything, without 5 reasons hidden behind the obvious one. She set down her knife. Eric lost his wife, Asta, 2 winters back. Beautiful woman, soft-spoken, perfect Norse bloodline. She died screaming his name while their son died inside her. Freda felt ice slide down her spine. Why are you telling me this? Because since then, every Jarl and Carl with a daughter has offered him marriage, political alliances, trade agreements, peace bonds. He's refused them all. Deirdre's dark eyes locked onto Freda's. So if he's suddenly interested in a bastard thrall who speaks Gaelic, it's not because he wants a wife. It's because he wants a tool. And you need to decide right now if you're willing to be used. The summons came at sunset. Not from Ingrid, but from one of Eric's own men, a weathered warrior with kind eyes and a scar that split his lip. He addressed Freda with more courtesy than she'd received in 2 weeks. Lord Eric requests your presence. You're to come as you are, as she was, meaning dressed in thrall clothing, fish scales still clinging to her sleeves, hair in a practical braid instead of the elaborate styles free women wore. The message was clear. He wanted everyone to see exactly what she was. The great hall felt enormous after the cramped thrall quarters. Firelight danced across carved beams. The smell of roasted meat made Freda's stomach clench with sudden, vicious hunger. She hadn't eaten anything but thin porridge and fish scraps in 2 weeks. She forced herself not to stare at the food, forced herself to keep her spine straight and her chin level. Eric sat at the head table with Ingrid to his right and her 2 young sons beside her. The boys looked confused and frightened. Ingrid looked like a woman who'd swallowed poison and was waiting to see if it would kill her or her enemy first. Freda, daughter of Bjorn the Bold and Marid of Connaught, Eric said, using her mother's full name and homeland. Something twisted in Freda's chest. No one had spoken her mother's name with respect in 8 years. Step forward. She obeyed. Her legs felt disconnected from her body. I have purchased you from this household, Eric continued, his voice carrying to every corner of the hall. You are now property of my clan. In 3 days' time, we travel to my settlement. You will serve as translator for upcoming trade negotiations with Irish merchants. Relief and terror warred in Freda's throat. She was leaving. She would never have to gut another fish under Ingrid's hateful stare. But translating for Eric meant traveling with him, being near him, being useful until she wasn't anymore. And then what? However, Eric said, and the single word made the hall go silent. I don't keep thralls in my household. Freda's heart stopped. So, I'm offering you a choice. He stood, moving around the table until he was 3 paces from her, close enough that she could see the silver threading through his dark beard, the lines around his eyes that spoke of sleepless nights and hard decisions. Remain thrall and come with me as property. You'll be fed, clothed, protected as long as you're useful. But you'll sleep with the enslaved, and you'll never be more than what you are right now. He paused. The fire crackled. Someone coughed. Freda couldn't breathe. or accept my offer of marriage." The hall erupted, voices shouting over each other. Ingrid was on her feet, face purple with rage. One of Eric's men was grinning like he'd just witnessed the best joke of his life. The boys looked terrified. Freda felt the room spin. Marriage to Eric Barba de Ferro, a man who commanded 3 settlements and a fleet of trading ships, a man who'd refused proposals from legitimate daughters of Jarls, and he was offering it to her. A bastard thrall covered in fish scales. "You've lost your mind," Ingrid hissed. "This is an insult to every free woman in this territory. She's thrall. She's the daughter of a captured Irish slave. She's also the daughter of Bjorn the Bold, who saved my life in battle 12 years ago," Eric replied, and his voice cut through the chaos like a blade through water. "I owe her father a blood debt. This is how I choose to pay it. Lies." The word blazed through Freda's mind. Maybe not complete lies, but not complete truth either. Her father had never mentioned saving Eric's life, had never mentioned knowing him beyond passing recognition at assemblies. This was strategy. This was politics. This was Eric. Needing something that only she could provide and dressing it up in honor debt to make it palatable. But why marriage? Why not just buy her as thrall and use her translation skills? Unless he needed legitimacy for something. Unless he needed her to negotiate as an equal, not a slave. Unless his plans went deeper than simple trade. Eric's eyes found hers again. He was waiting. The entire hall was waiting. "I need to understand the terms," Freda said, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. "Marriage means different things to different people." A ripple of shock went through the room. Thralls didn't negotiate. Thralls accepted or refused and faced consequences either way. But she wasn't just thrall anymore, was she? The moment Eric made his offer, he'd shifted the ground beneath her feet. Something that might have been respect flickered across Eric's face. "You would be my wife-in-law in name. You would sit at my table, manage my household, speak with my voice in trade. Negotiations. Your children, should we have them, would be legitimate heirs. And in private?" The question came out before Freda could stop it. Heat flooded her face, but she held his gaze. "In private, you would have your own chamber. I require a political partner, not a bed warmer." His voice was flat, factual. "I lost my wife 2 winters ago. I'm not looking to replace her." The honesty was almost worse than deception would have been. At least deception would have pretended she mattered as something more than useful. But this? This was a business arrangement wrapped in marriage vows. She would be wife and title only. Tool with better lodging. But she would be free. She would sit at tables instead of scrubbing them. She would speak instead of being spoken about. She would have a future that wasn't fish guts and straw pallets and waiting to age into uselessness. "I accept," Freda said. Ingrid made a sound like a wounded animal. Eric nodded once, brisk and businesslike. "Then it's settled. We marry tomorrow at noon and leave the following dawn." He turned away from her, back to the table, already moving past the moment that had just redefined her entire existence. Freda stood there, fish scales on her sleeves and marriage in her future, and wondered what kind of trap she'd just walked into with her eyes wide open. That night, alone on her straw pallet for the last time, she finally let herself cry. Not from happiness, not from relief, but from the terrible, crushing knowledge that nothing was free, not protection, not freedom, not even mercy. Everything had a price, and she wouldn't know what Eric Barba de Ferro's price truly was until it was far too late to refuse payment. The wedding happened in cold sunlight with witnesses who looked like they were attending a funeral. Freda wore a dress that one of Eric's men had procured overnight, simple blue wool that actually fit her frame, clean and free of fish scales. Someone had even provided her with proper leather shoes instead of the worn thrall's foot wraps. She felt like she was wearing a costume, playing a part in a saga that would end badly for everyone involved. Eric stood beside her in the center of the assembly ground, dressed in his formal tunic with silver brooches at the shoulders. He looked tired, not nervous or happy or reluctant, just tired, like this was one more duty in a long list of duties that never ended. When the Gothi began the ritual words, Eric's responses were perfectly correct and completely empty. Freda spoke her vows clearly. She would not give Ingrid or anyone else the satisfaction of seeing her stumble. When Eric placed the bride price ring on her finger, heavy silver that slid around loosely because it had been sized for someone else, for Asta probably, she felt something cold and final lock into place around more than just her hand. "You are now bound by law and witness," the Gothi declared. "What the gods have joined, let no man separate." The gods had nothing to do with this, Freda thought. This was human calculation dressed up in sacred words. But she smiled appropriately and accepted the stiff congratulations from Eric's men. Ingrid didn't attend. Neither did her sons. That absence said more than any protest could have. The feast afterward was modest. Eric clearly had no interest in celebration. They ate roasted pork and drank mead while his men made awkward attempts at wedding jokes that died in the uncomfortable silence. Freda sat at the high table in the seat that had belonged to Asta and felt like an imposter wearing a dead woman's identity. "You'll need to pack light," Eric said to her during the meal, his first direct words since the ceremony. "We travel fast and the ships can't carry excess weight." "I have nothing to pack." The words came out harder than she intended. "Everything I owned fit in my mother's wooden chest, and Ingrid claimed it the day my father died." Eric's jaw tightened slightly. "Then we'll outfit you properly at my settlement. You'll need appropriate clothing for your position." "Your position, not our marriage, not as my wife," as if she were a newly appointed steward or trade negotiator, which Freda supposed was exactly what she was. They left before dawn the next morning. Freda had said goodbye to Deirdre in the darkness, holding the older woman tightly while trying not to break down completely. "You're stronger than you know," Deirdre had whispered in Gaelic. "Your mother would be proud, not because you're marrying up, but because you're surviving." Now, sitting in the drakkar as it cut through spring-cold water, Freda watched her father's settlement disappear into morning mist. She felt nothing. No relief, no sadness, no triumph. Just a strange numbness that might have been shock or might have been the only thing keeping her functional. Eric's men rode in practiced rhythm. There were 12 of them, plus Eric and herself. They were heading to his main settlement. 2 days' journey up the coast. Nobody spoke much. The only sounds were oars cutting water, wind filling the sail, seabirds crying overhead. Freda studied Eric when she thought he wasn't looking. He stood at the prow, one hand on the dragonhead post, staring ahead with that same tired expression. What drove a man to marry a thrall he didn't want, instead of accepting legitimate proposals from women who would have brought genuine political advantage? The blood debt story was too convenient, too simple. Men like Eric didn't make decisions based on single reasons. "You're wondering why?" Eric's voice startled her. He'd moved without her noticing, was now sitting on the bench beside her. "I can see it in your face. You're trying to solve the puzzle." Freda considered lying, then decided against it. "The blood debt explanation doesn't make sense. My father saved your life 12 years ago, you said. Why wait until now to repay it? Why not help him while he was alive?" Perceptive. Eric's mouth curved in something that wasn't quite a smile. "You're right. The debt is real, but it's not the whole reason." He paused, watching the coastline slide past. "I need to expand trade routes into Irish territories. The Irish merchants don't trust Vikings for obvious reasons. Too many raids, too much blood. But they will negotiate with someone who understands their language, their culture, their ways of thinking. You could have just bought me as thrall for that." "I could have. But thralls negotiate from a position of weakness. Everyone knows they're just speaking their master's words. I need someone who can negotiate as an equal, someone with actual authority." He turned to look at her directly. "I need a wife who can sit at trade tables and make binding agreements in my name. Someone whose word carries legal weight." There it was. The real reason. Freda felt something bitter settle in her chest. "So I'm a very expensive translation tool. You're a partner in a business arrangement," Eric corrected. "And before you decide that's insulting, Understand that most marriages among our class are exactly that. Political alliances dressed up in ceremony. At least I'm being honest about it. Did you love her? The question escaped before Freda could stop it. Your first wife, Asta. Eric's face went completely still. For 3 heartbeats he didn't breathe. When he spoke again, his voice was carefully controlled. That's not relevant to our arrangement. It's relevant to me. Freda kept her voice steady. Because I need to know if you're going to spend our entire marriage comparing me to a ghost I can never measure up to. Something dangerous flickered in Eric's eyes. You want honesty? Yes. I loved her. She was kind and gentle and everything a proper Norse wife should be. And she died screaming because I got her pregnant. Because I wanted an heir badly enough to risk her life. His hands clenched into fists. So no, Freda, I will never ask that of you. I will never risk that again. You are safe from me in every way that matters. The pain in his voice was so raw it made Freda's chest ache. She understood then. Eric wasn't cold. He was cauterized. He'd burned away the parts of himself that could feel that deeply because feeling had cost him everything. I'm sorry, she said quietly, for your loss and for prying. Eric stood abruptly. Get some rest. We'll reach my settlement by tomorrow evening and you'll need to be sharp. The Irish merchants arrive in 3 days and they're not going to make this easy. He walked away before she could respond. Freda pulled her cloak tighter against the sea wind and closed her eyes. She'd gotten her answer, but it brought no comfort. She was married to a man who'd locked his heart away in a dead woman's tomb. A man who needed her skills, but would never need her. That night they camped on a rocky beach. Eric's men built a fire and shared dried fish and hard bread. Freda sat slightly apart, still, uncertain of her place in this group. Was she one of them now, or still an outsider with a fancy title? One of the men, the one with the scarred lip who'd summoned her to the hall, sat down beside her. I'm Torsten, he said. I've sailed with Eric for 8 years, since before Asta. Why are you telling me this? Because I want you to know that what Eric did, marrying you, it wasn't cruel. I know it feels that way, like you're just a tool. Torsten poked at the fire with a stick. But Eric doesn't use people. He's too aware of what it costs. If he married you, it's because he genuinely believes this arrangement benefits you as much as him. Does it? Freda asked bitterly. I went from thrall to wife overnight, but I'm still just performing a function. I'm still just useful. We're all just useful, Torsten said. Every person on this crew. Eric chose each of us because we have skills he needs, but he also protects us, pays us fairly, never asks us to die for his glory. He stood, brushing sand from his pants. Being useful isn't the same as being used. You'll figure out the difference eventually. Freda lay awake long after the camp settled into sleep. The stars overhead were cold and bright. The waves whispered against the shore in a language older than Norse or Gaelic. And somewhere in the darkness she heard Eric's voice, low and strained, talking to someone in his sleep. She couldn't make out the words, but the tone was clear. He was apologizing. Over and over and over. She pulled her cloak over her head and tried not to hear it. Tried not to feel sympathy for a man who'd bought her freedom with marriage vows that meant everything legally and nothing emotionally. But the apologies continued, soft and broken, until finally they faded into silence. And Freda realized with cold certainty that she'd married a man haunted by more ghosts than just his dead wife. Eric's settlement rose from the coastline like something out of the old stories Freda's mother used to tell. Larger than her father's holding, more organized, with a proper harbor where 3 longships rested beside fishing boats and trade vessels. The longhouse dominated the center, its carved posts depicting scenes of negotiation and trade rather than battle and conquest. Even from the water, Freda could see this was a place built on commerce, not warfare. The people who gathered at the dock to greet them were curious, but not hostile. They watched Freda with open speculation as she stepped from the ship, Eric's hand briefly steadying her elbow. The touch was impersonal, practical, gone as soon as she found her footing. but people noticed. Whispers rippled through the crowd. "This is Freda," Eric announced, his voice carrying across the assembled faces. "My wife. She is to be treated with the same respect you show me. Her word on trade matters carries my authority. Anyone who questions this can discuss it with me privately." The last sentence held quiet menace. No one seemed eager to take him up on the offer. A woman approached, maybe 50 winters old, with iron gray hair and sharp, intelligent eyes. "I'm Sigrid. I manage the household." She looked Freda up and down with frank assessment. Eric sent word ahead. "Your chambers are prepared." Chambers, plural. Freda felt something sink in her stomach even as she nodded gratefully. The longhouse interior was beautiful in an austere way. Clean lines, quality craftsmanship, everything organized with military precision. Sigrid led Freda through the main hall, past the high table where Eric would take his meals, down a corridor to a room that made Freda's breath catch. It was larger than any space she'd ever had to herself. A proper bed with fur coverings, a chest for clothing, a small table with a chair, even a brazier for heat. A narrow window looked out over the settlement. It was luxury beyond anything she'd imagined. "Eric's chamber is next door," Sigrid said, and her tone was carefully neutral. "There's a connecting door, but it remains locked from both sides unless specifically opened. Those were his instructions." Of course they were. Freda ran her hand over the bed furs, focusing on the texture to keep her face composed. "It's more than adequate. Thank you." Sigrid's expression softened slightly. "The Irish merchants arrive tomorrow. Eric will want to brief you tonight on the negotiations. I'll send someone when he's ready." She paused at the door. "For what it's worth, this settlement has seen 3 of Eric's marriages proposed and rejected in the last 2 years. Daughters of Jarls, women with impeccable lineage. You're the first one he actually chose. That means something, even if it doesn't feel like it yet." After Sigrid left, Freda sat on the edge of the bed and let herself fall apart for exactly 10 breaths. Counted them carefully, 1 through 10. Then she stood, washed her face in the basin of water someone had left, and rebuilt her composure piece by piece. She was examining the clothing someone had already placed in the chest, simple but well-made dresses in good wool and linen, when a knock came at the door. Not the main door, the connecting door to Eric's chamber. "Come in," she called, and watched as Eric entered from his side. His room was even more austere than hers. She could see a bed, a weapons rack, a single chair. Nothing personal, nothing soft. It looked like a place someone existed in but didn't live. The Irish? "Delegation is led by a man named Cormac," Eric said without preamble. He spread a piece of vellum on her table, marked with notes in neat script. "He's been trading with Norse settlements for 15 years. Shrewd, cautious, has a long memory for insults and an even longer memory for broken agreements." Freda studied the notes. Eric's handwriting was surprisingly elegant. "What does he want from us?" "Tin, iron, walrus ivory. He can provide silver, dyes, wool, grain. The terms are relatively straightforward." Eric's finger tapped a specific line. "The complication is that Cormac's daughter married a Norse raider 3 years ago. The marriage was disastrous. She died under suspicious circumstances." Ice slid down Freda's spine. "He thinks her husband killed her. He knows her husband killed her, but he can't prove it, and the man's clan is powerful enough that pressing the issue would start a blood feud Cormac can't afford." Eric's eyes met hers. "So Cormac hates Vikings. All Vikings. And he's especially hostile toward Norsemen who take Irish wives." Understanding crashed over Freda like a wave. "That's why you needed to marry someone with Irish blood, not just for language skills, for credibility." "Partially." Eric rolled up the vellum. "But also because Cormac will test you. He'll speak in rapid Irish, use idioms and references that most translators wouldn't catch. He'll be looking for any sign that you're just a Norse tool mouthing words. If he suspects that, negotiations fail before they begin. So I need to prove I'm actually Irish." Freda felt her jaw tighten. "That I'm not just another Norse wife who'll end up dead under suspicious circumstances." Something shifted in Eric's expression. "I would never." I know. And she did know, somehow. Whatever Eric's faults, whatever coldness he wrapped around himself, violence against women wasn't part of his character. But Cormac doesn't know that. He'll be watching for signs, testing the dynamic between us, which is why we need to establish clear boundaries now. Eric's voice was clinical, detached. In public, we present a united front. You speak with my authority. I support your translations without question. In private, we maintain professional distance. No one outside this room needs to know the details of our arrangement. Professional distance. The words sat bitter on Freda's tongue. You mean no one needs to know you married me for functionality rather than affection? I mean, no one needs ammunition to undermine your position. Eric's tone sharpened. You think I don't know how this looks? A thrall elevated to wife overnight? People are already whispering. Some think I've lost my mind. Others think you've somehow manipulated me. The only way you gain genuine respect is through demonstrated competence. He wasn't wrong. Freda hated that he wasn't wrong. Fine. Professional partners in public, strangers in private. Is that everything? Not quite. Eric pulled something from his belt, a small eating knife in a leather sheath, the handle carved with intricate knotwork. This belonged to your mother. Freda's hands trembled as she took it. She knew this knife, had watched her mother use it countless times, had believed it lost when Ingrid ransacked her possessions. How did you? I bought it back from Ingrid's household, along with the rest of the contents of your mother's chest. Eric nodded toward the storage chest in the corner that Freda had assumed contained only new items. Everything she left you is there. I thought you should have it. The kindness of it struck Freda like a physical blow. She clutched the knife, feeling tears threaten. Why would you do this? Because those items are yours by right. Eric's voice was matter of fact, as if purchasing someone's stolen inheritance was perfectly ordinary. And because you'll need them tomorrow. Cormac will be watching for signs of your mother in you. Having her possessions. Wearing something that belonged to her, it will help. He moved toward the connecting door, clearly considering the conversation finished. Freda's voice stopped him. Eric, did you know my mother? He froze. For 3 heartbeats, he didn't turn around. When he did, his face was carefully blank. Why would you ask that? Because you knew her full name, her homeland. Because you went out of your way to recover her possessions. Because... Freda's breath caught. Because you're going to far more trouble than a simple blood debt would require. Eric's jaw worked. A muscle jumped in his cheek. I was at the raid where she was captured. 22 years ago, I was a young warrior making my first major voyage. Your mother's village, it was supposed to be abandoned. Intelligence said everyone had fled. But she was there. She and 3 other women, too old or too stubborn to run. The room felt like it was tilting. You took her. My captain took her. I was barely old enough to hold a sword. Properly. Eric's voice was flat, drained of emotion. But I was there. I saw it happen. I saw her fight like a cornered wolf. Saw them drag her onto the ship. Saw her eyes when she realized she'd never see her home again. He closed his eyes briefly. So yes, Freda, I knew your mother. Not well, not personally, but I knew her. And I've carried that knowing for 22 years. The connecting door closed behind him with a soft click. Freda stood alone, holding her mother's knife, and felt the ground shift beneath her understanding of everything. This wasn't a business arrangement. This was something far more complicated. Eric hadn't married her to pay a debt to her father. He'd married her to pay a debt to her mother, to the Irish woman whose life he'd watched destroyed before his eyes. She opened her mother's chest with shaking hands. Inside were the few precious items Marie had managed to keep through decades of captivity. A silver brooch from her homeland, a comb carved from bone, 3 ribbons in faded colors, and at the bottom, wrapped carefully in cloth, a small wooden cross. Freda picked it up and something fell from the folds. A piece of vellum, old and brittle. She unfolded it carefully. The writing was her mother's, in Irish, shaky but legible. If you find this, daughter mine, Know that I chose survival not from weakness, but from strength. I chose to live because death is easy, and living with purpose is hard. Find your purpose, even in chains, especially in chains. Make them regret underestimating you. Freda pressed the letter to her chest and let herself cry, not from sadness, from something fiercer. Her mother had survived 22 years in captivity and raised a daughter who could speak 2 languages, who could stand straight even when the world tried to break her. And Eric had witnessed that strength and never forgotten it. Tomorrow she would face Cormac and prove herself. But tonight, she let herself grieve for the mother who'd never broken, and the man next door who'd been carrying guilt like stones for longer than Freda had been alive. Cormac arrived with the morning tide, and Freda knew him immediately by the way he carried grief like a weapon. He was maybe 50 winters, with silver threading through red gold hair and eyes that assessed everything twice. 3 men accompanied him, all watching the Norse settlement with the wariness of people who'd learned not to trust hospitality. Freda had dressed carefully. One of her mother's ribbons woven into her braid, the silver brooch at her shoulder, her mother's knife visible at her belt. She stood beside Eric at the dock, spine straight, and waited. Cormac's eyes found her first, before Eric, before anything else. She watched him take in the Irish ribbon, the brooch, the way she held herself. Then his gaze dropped to the knife, and something flickered across his face. Recognition, maybe, or memory. Cormac of Sil Chainai, Eric said formally in Norse. Welcome to my settlement. May we speak of mutual prosperity. Cormac's response came in rapid Irish, the words flowing together in the way of native speakers who wanted to test whether translators could keep up. I see you've acquired yourself a pretty decoration, Viking. Does she speak, or just stand there looking half-civilized? Freda responded before Eric could, her Irish carrying the accent of southern kingdoms that her mother had drilled into her. I speak well enough to know you just insulted both of us, and I'm deciding whether that was ignorance or strategy. Cormac's eyebrows rose. A smile ghosted across his mouth, not friendly, but appreciative. Strategy. I need to know if you're real or performance. He switched to Norse, heavily accented, but competent. Your wife has spirit, Eric Barbadifero. Let's see if she has substance. The negotiations took place in Eric's hall, around a table that had been set with mead and bread and salt, traditional gestures of hospitality that Cormac accepted with visible reluctance. Freda sat at Eric's right hand, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. A united front, just as they'd planned. For the first hour, they discussed surface matters, trade quantities, shipping schedules, quality standards. Freda translated smoothly, catching nuances in both languages that straightforward word exchange would have missed. When Cormac made a joke in Irish about Norse mead tasting like horse piss, she translated it accurately and watched Eric's mouth twitch with reluctant amusement. Tell him our horses are very particular about their diets, Eric said dryly. The ice began to crack, not breaking, just cracking. Cormac leaned back in his chair and studied them both. You're not what I expected, he said to Freda in Irish. Most Norse wives I've met are either terrified silent or aggressively ignorant of anything beyond their husband's glory. Most thralls elevated to wife status are just grateful to be fed, Freda replied honestly. I'm still figuring out which category I fall into. Cormac's eyes sharpened. Thrall? She'd revealed too much. Eric's hand moved slightly on the table, not quite touching hers, but close enough to offer steadiness. My mother was Meret of Connaught, taken in a raid 22 years ago. I was born in captivity. My father was Norse but never claimed me officially. She met Cormac's gaze directly. Eric married me 3 days ago. I'm still learning what that means beyond legal definitions. The silence stretched. Cormac's men shifted uncomfortably. Eric remained perfectly still beside her, but she could feel tension radiating from him like heat from a forge. Meret of Connaught, Cormac repeated slowly. Daughter of Phelan the Red? Freda's heart stopped. You knew her? I knew of her family. Good people. Phelan was killed defending his village during the raid that took his daughter. Cormac's expression was unreadable. She had brothers. They searched for her for years. Died never knowing what became of her. The words hit Freda like fists. Her mother had family who'd loved her, who'd searched, who'd died without answers. She'd spent 22 years enslaved while her brothers tried to find her. The injustice of it made Freda's throat close. She died 8 years ago. Freda managed. She never stopped speaking Irish, never stopped teaching me, never stopped being herself despite everything they tried to take from her. Cormac nodded slowly. Then he did something unexpected. He reached across the table and placed his hand over Freda's, the gesture brief but deliberate. Your mother's brothers are in the next world now, but if they could see you, sitting here speaking for yourself, commanding respect in the house of Vikings. His voice roughened. They would be proud beyond words. Eric cleared his throat. Perhaps we should take a break from negotiations. No. Freda surprised herself with the firmness in her voice. We continue. My mother survived worse than difficult conversations. So will I. Something shifted in Cormac's eyes. Respect, genuine this time. He withdrew his hand and sat back. Very well. Let's discuss the real issue. Trust. He switched to Norse so Eric could follow without translation. I don't trust Vikings. I have excellent reasons. But I need what you can provide, and you need my silver. So we have mutual necessity. The question is whether we can build something beyond that. What would it take? Eric asked. What would convince you we're negotiating in good faith? Time, consistent behavior, multiple successful transactions that demonstrate reliability. Cormac's gaze moved between them. And transparency about your intentions. This marriage of yours, it's strategic. I'm not fool enough to think otherwise, but I need to understand the strategy. Freda and Eric exchanged glances. In that moment, she saw calculation in his eyes, but also something else. A question. He was leaving the decision to her, whether to be honest or maintain the fiction. She chose honesty. Eric needed someone who could navigate both worlds, Norse and Irish. Someone who could sit at negotiation tables as an equal, not a translator standing behind his chair. I needed to not die as a thrall. We made an arrangement that benefits both of us. She paused, but it's becoming more complicated than that. How so? Cormac leaned forward, genuinely curious. Because I'm discovering that Eric carries guilt about my mother's capture. That this marriage is partially his attempt at restitution for something he witnessed as a young man. Freda glanced at Eric, saw his jaw tighten, but he didn't interrupt. And I'm discovering that being useful isn't the same as being used. That even arrangements made from necessity can evolve into something with actual meaning. The hall was so quiet Freda could hear her own heartbeat. Eric stared at the table, his face unreadable. Cormac watched them both with the expression of a man solving a puzzle. You're honest, Cormac said finally. That's dangerous in negotiations, but valuable in partnerships. He stood, and his men stood with him. I'm accepting your terms for the initial trade. We'll do a small transaction first. If that goes well, we expand. If it doesn't, we part ways without blood. Fair? Fair, Eric agreed, standing as well. They clasped forearms in the traditional way, sealing the agreement. After Cormac and his men left for the guest quarters, Freda remained at the table, suddenly exhausted. Eric sat back down across from her. They didn't speak for a long moment. You told him everything, Eric said finally. I told him the truth, most of it. Freda met his eyes. Was I wrong? No, you were brilliant. Eric's voice was quiet. Cormac values honesty above almost everything else. If you'd tried to sell him a perfect love story, he'd have walked away. He paused. But you revealed things I didn't expect you to reveal. About you? Feeling guilty? Freda twisted the ring on her finger, Asta's ring that still didn't quite fit. You are guilty, Eric. You've been carrying that weight for 22 years. Maybe it's time someone acknowledged it out loud. And what do you want from me? The question came out rough. Absolution? I can't give you that. What happened to your mother? I can't undo it. I don't want you to undo it. I want you to stop punishing yourself by refusing to feel anything. Freda's hands were shaking so she pressed them flat against the table. You loved Asta. She died. That's tragedy, not crime. You witnessed my mother's capture. That's trauma, not sin. You're allowed to be human instead of just functional. Eric's face was pale. You don't understand what you're asking. I understand that you built walls so high around yourself that you can barely breathe. I understand because I'm doing the same thing. We're both so busy surviving that we've forgotten how to live. Freda stood. I'm going. To my chamber. We have another day of negotiations tomorrow and I need to be sharp. She was at the corridor entrance when Eric's voice stopped her. Freda. She turned. Thank you, he said, for handling Cormac, for being honest when dishonesty would have been easier, he seemed to struggle with the words, for seeing me as more than just the man who bought your freedom. You didn't buy my freedom, Freda said softly. You offered me a chance to claim it myself. There's a difference. In her chamber that night, Freda lay awake listening to the settlement sounds through her window. Somewhere in the darkness, she heard Eric moving in his room. Pacing maybe, or just existing in that austere space he'd created. She thought about the connecting door between them, locked from both sides. A physical barrier that represented everything complicated about their arrangement. But Freda was starting to understand something her mother had known. That survival was just the beginning. That the real challenge was figuring out how to build a life worth surviving for. And maybe, just maybe, she and Eric could figure that out together. Not through grand romantic gestures or sudden love, but through small moments of honesty. Through choosing to see each other clearly instead of through the protective blur of walls and distance. The negotiations weren't just about trade goods and silver. They were about whether two broken people could construct something functional from their respective damages. Whether usefulness could evolve into genuine partnership. Whether walls built for protection could become foundations instead of prisons. Freda closed her eyes and let herself hope. Carefully. In small, manageable doses. Because hope, like everything else worth having, was dangerous. But it was also the only thing that made survival worthwhile. The second day of negotiations started with storm clouds gathering over the fjord and tension thicker than the humidity. Cormac arrived at the hall with a fourth man Freda hadn't seen before. Younger, maybe 30 winters, with the same red-gold hair and eyes that held carefully banked fury. My nephew Donald, Cormac said in Irish, watching Freda's face. He insists on observing today's discussions. Freda's instincts screamed warning. Eric felt it too. She could tell by the way his posture shifted, almost imperceptibly, into something more guarded. He's welcome, Eric said through her translation. We have nothing to hide. Donald's laugh was sharp and bitter. Nothing to hide? You're Vikings. Hiding brutality behind trade agreements is what you do best. The words hung in the air like drawn blades. Freda translated them exactly as spoken, watching Eric's face remain carefully neutral, but his hand on the table had curled into a fist. Donald, Cormac's voice carried quiet warning. We discussed this. You discussed this. I agreed to nothing. Donald's eyes fixed on Freda, and the hatred in them made her skin crawl. You're Mered's daughter, Phelan's granddaughter, and you sit here playing wife to the people who destroyed your family. Do you have no shame? The words hit like stones. Freda felt her breath catch, felt every person in the hall watching to see how she'd respond. Eric started to stand, but she touched his arm, stopping him. This was hers to handle. She switched to Irish, her voice steady, despite the trembling in her hands. My mother taught me that survival isn't surrender, that making choices from limited options isn't betrayal. I sit here because the alternative was dying slowly in thrall quarters, forgotten and used up. She met Donald's furious gaze directly. Don't you dare question my shame. I've carried enough for both of us. You married one of them. Donald's voice shook. My aunt, Cormac's sister, she married a Viking too. He seemed civilized. spoke pretty words about partnership and respect. Then one night during an argument, he beat her so badly she couldn't speak. 3 months later, she was dead, and everyone called it accident. Tragic misfortune. The hall went deadly silent. Freda felt ice flood her veins. She glanced at Cormac, saw grief carved into every line of his face. This was the daughter he'd mentioned, the one who died under suspicious circumstances. "I'm sorry," Freda said quietly in Irish, "for your cousin, for the injustice of her death, for every Irish woman taken by Vikings who never saw home again, including my mother." She paused, choosing her next words carefully. "But Eric is not that man. This settlement is not that place, and I am not your cousin." "How do you know?" Donald demanded. "How long have you known him? 3 days? 4? You think you understand him? You think you're safe?" Eric's voice cut through the tension, speaking Norse but clearly demanding translation. "What is he saying?" Freda translated, leaving nothing out. Every accusation, every piece of pain. When she finished, Eric was pale, but his voice remained controlled. "Tell him," Eric said, "that I understand his anger. That if I were in his position, I would probably feel the same way. Tell him that I have no defense against the crimes of other Norse men, except to say that I am not them, that I have built this settlement on trade, not raids, on negotiation, not violence." He paused, and something raw crossed his face. "Tell him that I watched Freda's mother be taken against her will 22 years ago, that I was young and powerless to stop it, that I have carried that memory every day since, that marrying Freda is not possession, it's the only form of restitution I could offer." Freda translated, her voice shaking slightly. Donald's expression didn't soften, but something in his posture shifted. Uncertainty maybe, or recognition that Eric's pain was genuine even if it didn't erase anything. "Words are easy," Donald said finally. "Prove it. Prove you're different." "How?" Eric asked simply. "There's a Norse settlement 3 days south, led by a man named Ragnar who raids Irish villages every spring." Donald leaned forward. "His men took 2 Irish women last month. One is pregnant. The other is barely 15 winters old. Get them back. Return them to their families. Then maybe I'll believe Vikings can be something other than predators." Cormac closed his eyes briefly. "Donald, that's not part of our trade negotiations." "Then I'm making it part." Donald's jaw was set. "Otherwise I go home and tell every Irish merchant from here to Dublin that Cormac is doing business with Vikings who talk peace while their neighbors commit atrocities." Eric's face was unreadable. Freda felt her heart hammering. This was impossible. Ragnar was powerful, his clan was large, and interfering in his raids would be seen as hostile act. It could start a conflict that would devastate Eric's settlement, but refusing would destroy any chance of Irish trade partnerships. And those 2 women would remain captive, living her mother's nightmare. "I need to discuss this with my advisors," Eric said finally. "This is not a decision I can make in the moment." "You have until sunset," Donald replied. "Then we leave, with or without agreement." After the Irish delegation returned to their quarters, Eric's hall erupted in argument. Torsten and the other senior men gathered around the table, voices raised. "It's a trap," one man said. "Ragnar will see any attempt to take those women as act of war. And if we refuse, we lose Irish trade entirely," another countered. "Which leaves us vulnerable to Ragnar anyway, since we can't afford to expand our defenses. We could negotiate with Ragnar, offer to buy the women." "Ragnar doesn't negotiate. He takes what he wants and laughs at anyone who suggests otherwise." Eric listened to it all, face carved from stone. Then his eyes found Freda's. "What do you think?" The hall went quiet. Every man turned to look at her. Freda felt the weight of their attention, their skepticism, about whether a woman, a former thrall, had anything valuable to contribute to strategic decisions. "I think," she said carefully, "that this isn't just about trade or politics. This is about what kind of people we choose to be." She stood, moving to stand beside Eric. Donald is testing whether our words mean anything, whether we're willing to back up claims of being different with actual risk. If we refuse, we prove we're just like every other Viking who speaks peace while benefiting from violence. She's right, Torsten said quietly. This is about our reputation, about whether the Irish will ever trust us enough for real partnership. But how do we get the women without starting a war? Another man demanded. Freda felt an idea forming. Dangerous, possibly stupid, but maybe the only option. We don't take them by force. We offer Ragnar something he values more than 2 Irish captives. Eric's eyes narrowed. What could we possibly offer that he doesn't already have? Information, Freda said. Ragnar raids Irish villages. But he doesn't speak Irish. He doesn't understand their defensive strategies, their communication networks, their advanced warning systems. He succeeds through brutality and surprise, not intelligence. She took a breath. What if we offer him detailed information about Irish merchant routes, village defenses, everything that would make his future raids more profitable? In exchange for 2 women he probably barely notices anyway. The silence was absolute. Then Torsten spoke, his voice tight. You're suggesting we betray Irish settlements to save 2 Irish women? No. Freda's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed firm. I'm suggesting we give Ragnar false information, maps with wrong locations, defense strategies that are outdated, intelligence that will lead his raiders into traps instead of easy targets. She looked at Eric. The Irish villages Cormac trades with, they have networks, warning systems. If we coordinate with them, we can turn Ragnar's next raid into a disaster for him instead of for his victims. Eric stared at her. Then slowly, incredibly, he smiled. Not the polite, distant smile he usually wore. A real smile, fierce and almost frightening. You're talking about organized deception on a scale that would require perfect coordination between our settlement and multiple Irish villages. Yes. It could backfire catastrophically. If Ragnar discovers the deception, he'll come for us with everything. He has. Yes. And you're willing to risk that, to save 2 women you've never met? Freda thought of her mother, of 22 years in captivity, of dying without ever seeing home again. Yes, she said, I am. Eric looked at his men. I need volunteers. This is high risk for potentially no reward beyond doing the right thing. I'm not ordering anyone. You choose. Every single man raised his hand. Torsten grinned. About time we did something interesting. The planning took hours. Eric sent messengers to Cormac requesting a private meeting. When the Irish delegation returned, Freda laid out the entire plan in meticulous detail. Donald listened with growing amazement. You would do this? He asked finally. Risk your settlement, risk war with Ragnar to save 2 women. We would, Eric confirmed. But we need your help. We need Cormac's network to spread the false information, to prepare the villages for defensive action, to coordinate the trap. Cormac and Donald exchanged long looks. Finally, Cormac nodded. We'll do it, not just for the trade agreement, but because if this works, it changes everything. It proves that Vikings and Irish can be more than predator and prey. As the Irish delegation left to begin coordination, Eric caught Freda's arm gently. That was remarkable, and terrifying, and possibly insane. Probably all 3, Freda agreed. Her legs felt weak now that the adrenaline was fading. Did I just commit us to something impossible? Maybe. But if it works... Eric's expression was complex, layered with things he wasn't saying. If it works, you'll have accomplished something I've been trying to do for years, building genuine trust with Irish traders. And if it fails, then we face consequences together. His hand was still on her arm, warm and solid. Partners, like you said. That night, Freda couldn't sleep. She stood at her window watching stars reflect on the fjord, thinking about the plan they'd set in motion, thinking about the 2 Irish women waiting to be rescued, thinking about her mother, who'd never been rescued at all. A soft knock came at the connecting door. Freda, are you awake? She opened the door. Eric stood there in sleeping clothes, looking as exhausted and wired as she felt. I wanted to make sure you understood what we're doing tomorrow. The risk involved. I understand, she said. Do you want to come in? He hesitated, then stepped through, sat in the chair by her table while she perched on the edge of the bed. For a moment neither spoke. Why are you really doing this? Freda asked finally. The truth, Eric, not the strategic reasons. He was quiet for so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, because I'm tired. Tired of carrying guilt. Tired of watching violence continue because good men do nothing. Tired of being just functional. He looked at her directly. You were right. I've been punishing myself by refusing to feel, by refusing to risk caring about anything beyond basic survival. But watching you today, the way you risked everything for women you've never met, I remembered what it feels like to believe actions can mean something. Freda's throat was tight. I'm scared, Eric. What if I'm wrong? What if people die because of my plan? Then we carry that weight together, like partners do. He stood to leave, but Freda's voice stopped him. Can you stay? Just for a while. I don't want to be alone with my thoughts right now. Eric settled back into the chair, and as the night deepened around them, two broken people sat in comfortable silence, beginning to understand that healing didn't require grand transformations, just small moments of honest connection, just the willingness to stop surviving alone and start living together. The approach to Ragnar's settlement felt like sailing toward a storm you could see building on the horizon but couldn't avoid. Eric had taken 12 men, Frida and Torsten, who insisted on coming despite a barely healed shoulder. Wound from training, the ship cut through gray water under gray skies, and nobody spoke much. They were all thinking the same thing. This could go catastrophically wrong in about 100 different ways. Freda had spent the 3-day journey memorizing every detail of the false intelligence they were bringing. Merchant routes that led nowhere, village defenses that didn't exist, trade schedules invented from nothing. It had to be convincing enough that Ragnar would believe it, detailed enough that he wouldn't question the source, but wrong enough that acting on it would lead his raiders into carefully prepared ambushes. You don't have to do this, Eric had said on the second night, finding her studying the fabricated maps by firelight on the beach where they'd camped. I can present the offer. You can stay with the ship. Ragnar needs to see me, Freda had replied. Needs to believe I'm betraying my Irish connections out of loyalty to you. If it's just you offering information, he'll suspect trap. But if it's your Irish wife providing intelligence about her own people, it's believable. It also puts you directly in front of a man known for violence against women. I know. Freda had met his eyes in the firelight. But those two women he's holding, they're living my mother's nightmare right now. Every day we delay is another day they're waiting for rescue that might never come. I can handle Ragnar for a few hours if it means they go free. Now, watching Ragnar's settlement grow larger on the coastline, Freda tried to steady her breathing. The place looked exactly like what it was, a raider's stronghold. The longhouse was fortified, guards visible on elevated platforms, weapons displayed prominently. This was a place built on taking, not trading. Ragnar himself waited at the dock, a bear of a man with a scarred face and eyes that assessed them like a butcher examining livestock. He was flanked by 6 warriors, all armed, all watching Eric's crew with open hostility. Eric Barba de Ferro. Ragnar's voice was rough as gravel. I heard you got yourself a wife. Didn't believe it until now. His gaze slid over Freda with such obvious calculation that her skin crawled. Irish blood. Interesting choice. Practical choice. Eric replied, his tone carefully neutral. Which is why we're here. I have a business proposal. Ragnar laughed, the sound devoid of humor. You, proposing business to me? You're the one who preaches negotiation over raids. Who trades instead of takes. Why would I trust anything you offer? Because what I'm offering benefits you more than it benefits me. Eric gestured to Freda. My wife has connections to Irish trade networks, access to information about village defenses, merchant routes, seasonal patterns. Information that would make your raids significantly more profitable with significantly less risk. Ragnar's eyes narrowed. And why would you give me this? We're not allies. We're barely neutral. Because I need something from you in return. Eric's voice stayed level. You have 2 Irish women. One pregnant, one barely past childhood. I want them. The silence stretched. Then Ragnar threw his head back and laughed, genuine this time. You want to trade intelligence for 2 thralls? They're not even particularly useful. The young one cries constantly and the pregnant one is too weak for heavy labor. Then you lose nothing by trading them. Freda spoke for the first time, her Norse accent free and confident. But you gain detailed information that could double your raid profits while cutting your losses. Seems like favorable exchange. Ragnar studied her with unsettling intensity. You're willing to betray your own people? Give me information that will lead to Irish deaths? This was the critical moment. Freda had rehearsed this, but saying it out loud made her stomach turn. My people sold my mother into slavery and never looked for her. My people let me rot as thrall until Eric gave me status and protection. Why would I owe them loyalty? She forced herself to meet Ragnar's gaze. I owe loyalty to the man who made me wife instead of property. If he wants those women freed, I'll help him get them. And if that means Irish villages suffer, that's not my concern anymore. The lies tasted like ash. Every word felt like betrayal of her mother's memory. But Ragnar's expression shifted. He believed her. She could see it in the way his suspicion eased slightly. Show me this. Intelligence, he demanded. They spent 2 hours in Ragnar's hall, spreading maps and discussing fabricated trade routes. Freda played her part perfectly, answering questions with confident detail, adding small personal touches that made the false information feel authentic, mentioning a merchant named Seamus who didn't exist, describing a village defensive strategy she'd invented completely. Eric watched her work with carefully concealed amazement. She was brilliant at this, weaving truth and lies so seamlessly that even he had trouble distinguishing them. Several times she caught his eye, saw the question there. Are you okay? She gave tiny nods. I'm managing. Finally, Ragnar leaned back. This is valuable, if it's accurate. Test it, Eric suggested. Take the information about the southern route first. Small raid, low risk. If it works as described, you'll know the rest is good. The southern route was the trap's first layer. The village there had been warned, had brought in additional defenders, had prepared defenses that would make Ragnar's raid costly and unsuccessful without being obviously prepared. He'd lose men, but not enough to suspect deliberate setup. He'd just think the intelligence was slightly outdated. Ragnar considered, then nodded slowly. Agreed. I'll test the southern route in 1 week. If it's as profitable as you claim, we'll discuss further exchanges. He stood. Meanwhile, you can have your 2 Irish women. They're more trouble than they're worth anyway. The women were brought from the thrall quarters, and Freda's heart broke. The younger one, maybe 16 winters, had bruises on her arms and terror in her eyes. The pregnant one moved carefully, protectively, one hand always on her swollen belly. Both looked like they'd given up hope of rescue. Freda approached them slowly, speaking soft Irish. We're taking you home. You're safe now. The younger girl started crying. The pregnant woman just stared, like she didn't believe it was real. Getting them onto the ship felt like the longest walk of Freda's life. Every second she expected Ragnar to change his mind, to decide the trade wasn't worth it, to demand different terms. But they made it to the dock, made it onto the ship, made it away from shore. Only when Ragnar's settlement disappeared behind a headland did Freda let herself breathe. She sat with the 2 women, wrapped in spare cloaks, and held the younger one while she cried. The pregnant woman spoke finally, her voice hoarse from disuse. Why did you save us? You don't know us. Because someone should have saved my mother, Freda replied simply, and didn't. That night they camped on a protected beach. The 2 rescued women stayed close to the fire, eating carefully as if afraid the food would be taken away. Freda sat with them, translating their story for Eric. They were from a coastal village, taken during a dawn raid 1 month ago. The younger one, Alwaif, had been gathering seaweed. The pregnant one, Brianna, had been tending her garden. Neither had expected violence that morning. Neither had been able to fight back. "We'll get you to Cormac's network," Eric promised through Freda's translation. "They'll help you get home to your families." Brianna touched her belly. "My husband doesn't know about the baby. We'd only just realized before the raid." Tears slid down her face. "I thought I'd never see him again. Thought my child would be born into slavery." Freda held her hand, unable to speak past the tightness in her throat. This could have been her mother, had been her mother, in different form, born into captivity with no hope of freedom. Later, when the camp settled into sleep, Eric found Freda sitting at the water's edge. He sat beside her without speaking, just presence in the darkness. "I lied so smoothly," Freda said finally. "I looked Ragnar in the face and betrayed my heritage, my mother's memory, everything I should stand for. And I did it without hesitation." "You did it to save lives," Eric corrected gently. "The lies you told will lead to Irish villages being protected instead of destroyed, to Ragnar losing resources and reputation, to 2 women going home instead of dying in captivity. But what does it say about me that I can lie that convincingly? That I can put on that mask and feel nothing?" Eric was quiet for a moment. "It says you understand survival, that you learned from your mother how to be strong in ways that don't look like traditional strength. She survived 22 years by being smart, by choosing her battles, by playing roles when necessary." He touched her shoulder lightly. "You're honoring her by using those same skills to prevent other women from suffering what she suffered." Freda leaned into the touch without thinking. Eric's hand stayed on her shoulder, steadying. "What happens when Ragnar discovers the trap? He'll be angry, possibly violent, but he'll also be weakened. His reputation will suffer when his raids fail. His men will question his judgment. And by then, we'll have built strong enough alliances with Irish settlements that he won't be able to touch us without facing unified resistance." Eric's voice was thoughtful. "You didn't just save 2 women today, Freda. You started something larger. A network of cooperation between Vikings and Irish that could change how both peoples interact. Or I started a war that will get people killed. Maybe. Probably both." Eric's hand squeezed gently. "But doing nothing was also a choice, one that guaranteed those 2 women stayed enslaved and Ragnar continued raiding unopposed. At least this way we're fighting back." They sat in silence, watching moonlight on water. Freda thought about her mother, about survival and strength and the different masks people wore to get through impossible situations, about how healing wasn't linear or simple, about how partnership could be built on honesty about complicated truths rather than comfortable lies. "Eric," she said quietly, "I don't think I can keep doing this." His hand stilled on her shoulder. "Doing what?" "Pretending we're just business partners, pretending that sleeping in separate rooms with locked doors is sustainable." She turned to look at him. "We're building something here, something that matters, but we're still keeping each other at arm's length out of fear. Fear of vulnerability, fear of loss, fear of caring too much." Eric's face was difficult to read in the moonlight. "What are you asking for?" "I don't know exactly. Not declarations of love or dramatic changes. Just honesty about the fact that this is becoming more than functional arrangement, that we're becoming more than useful to each other." Freda's voice shook slightly. "I'm asking if you're willing to try, to stop hiding behind walls and see what happens if we're actually honest about caring." For a long moment, Eric didn't respond. Then slowly, carefully, he pulled her into an embrace. Not passionate or desperate, just solid and real and present. His chin rested on top of her head and she felt him exhale, long and shaky. "I'm terrified," he admitted quietly, "of losing someone again, of failing to protect what matters, of being responsible for another person's suffering." "I'm terrified too," Freda replied, "of trusting someone who could destroy me, of believing in partnership that might be temporary, of wanting something I'm not sure I deserve." "Then we're terrified." Together. Eric's arms tightened slightly. "And maybe that's enough to start with." They stayed like that while the fire burned down and stars wheeled overhead, Two people who'd been surviving alone, learning slowly and painfully how to survive together. Learning that strength wasn't just walls and distance. Sometimes it was vulnerability. Sometimes it was admitting you needed someone. Sometimes it was choosing to care despite knowing care came with the risk of devastating loss. The rescue mission had succeeded, but the real mission, the harder one, was just beginning. Learning to be more than functional, learning to build life instead of just enduring existence. Learning that healing was possible even for wounds that felt permanent. And as dawn began to gray the eastern horizon, Freda thought maybe, just maybe, they had a chance. 6 weeks after the rescue, news arrived that changed everything. Ragnar's raid on the southern route had been a disaster. He'd lost 12 men, 3 ships damaged, and returned with nothing to show for it except wounded pride and furious warriors questioning his leadership. But he hadn't suspected deliberate deception, not yet. He'd blamed outdated intelligence and bad luck. The real blow came 2 weeks later when his second raid, following another piece of false information Freda had provided, met coordinated Irish resistance. Organized, prepared, devastating. Ragnar lost 20 men that time and barely escaped with his life. That's when he understood. That's when the rage came. The messenger who brought word of Ragnar's fury was one of Eric's traders, a man who'd been in a neutral settlement when Ragnar's surviving warriors staggered in. He knows, the messenger said, face pale. He's figured out the intelligence was false. He's gathering allies, planning retaliation. Eric's hall filled with tension so thick Freda could barely breathe. The council of advisors assembled immediately, voices rising in argument and accusation. Some directed at her. "This is what happens when we trust a woman's strategy," one older warrior snarled. "Now we face war because of her deception." "We face war because we chose to do the right thing," Torsten countered sharply. "Would you prefer we'd left those women to suffer? That we'd continued letting Ragnar raid unopposed? I'd prefer we'd thought about consequences before acting on emotion." Freda stood. Every eye turned to her. "This is my responsibility. I designed the plan. If Ragnar comes for revenge, he comes for me. Let me face him. Offer me in exchange for peace." "Absolutely not." Eric's voice cut through the chaos like a blade. "Ragnar doesn't get to terrorize Irish villages and then demand justice when someone fights back. We don't negotiate with threats. But we do have to defend against them," another advisor said grimly. "Ragnar's gathering support from at least 3 other raider clans. We're looking at combined force of maybe 80 warriors. We have 35, even counting every man who can hold a weapon." The numbers were brutal. Freda felt ice settle in her stomach. This was her fault. Her plan, her deception, and now Eric's people would pay the price. She looked at Eric across the table and saw no anger in his face, just grim determination. "Send word to Cormac," Eric said, "and to every Irish settlement we've been coordinating with. Remind them that we're facing retaliation because we disrupted raids that would have targeted them. Ask if they remember that alliance is supposed to work both directions." The messenger left immediately. The council continued debating defensive strategies, evacuation plans for women and children, where to position their limited forces for maximum effectiveness. Freda listened but felt disconnected, her mind spinning through scenarios where this ended with Eric dead, because she'd convinced him to care about something beyond survival. That night, she couldn't stay in her chamber. Couldn't pretend to sleep while catastrophe approached. She found herself at the harbor, staring at dark water and darker thoughts. The connecting door between her room and Eric's had stayed unlocked since that night on the beach. They'd been building something fragile and real, eating meals together, talking late into the night about everything and nothing, learning each other's silences and what they meant. And now she'd destroyed it all. "You're thinking of running." Eric's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him approach. "Would it help? If I went to Ragnar myself and told him it was all my doing, would he leave your settlement alone?" "No. He'd take you, torture you for information about our defenses, then attack anyway." Eric moved to stand beside her. and I'd have to live knowing I let the woman I love walk into hell because I was too weak to protect her. Freda's breath stopped. What did you say? Eric looked at her finally, and his eyes held everything he'd been keeping locked away. Fear and hope and raw honesty. I said I love you. I didn't plan to, didn't want to risk it. But somewhere between thrall and translator and partner and friend, you became essential. You became the reason I want to survive instead of just existing. Tears burned Freda's eyes. Eric, I've ruined everything. I've brought war to your doorstep because I couldn't accept that some people can't be saved, because I had to act on emotion instead of strategy. You brought hope to my doorstep, Eric corrected. You reminded me that life is supposed to mean something beyond accumulation and safety, that risking everything for what's right is better than protecting nothing while pretending that's wisdom. He took her hands. Whatever comes, we face it together. That's what partnership means. That's what love means. I love you too, Freda whispered. I think I've loved you since you gave me my mother's knife back, since you saw me as person instead of function. But I'm so scared. If you die because of my choices, then I die having lived for something that mattered, having stood against brutality instead of enabling it through inaction. Eric pulled her close. I'd rather have 6 weeks of meaning with you than 6 decades of empty survival without you. They stood together in the darkness, holding each other like lifelines. And slowly, impossibly, Freda felt something shift inside her. Not peace exactly, but acceptance that some things were worth fighting for. Even when the odds were terrible, that love wasn't weakness. That choosing to care, choosing to act, choosing to build something better than the world you inherited, those were forms of strength that lasted longer than any victory in battle. The Irish response came 3 days later. Not just Cormac, but delegations from 7 different settlements. They brought warriors, 42 of them, armed and ready. They brought supplies, food, weapons, medical materials. And they brought something more, valuable than either: solidarity. Cormac clasped Eric's forearm in the traditional way, his grip firm. You stood for our people when you didn't have to. You disrupted a predator who'd been bleeding us for years. If you think we'll abandon you now, you don't understand what alliance actually means. Donald was there too, the angry nephew who'd tested them so harshly. He approached Freda directly. I was wrong about you, he said in Irish. I thought you were just another Viking bride who'd forgotten her roots. But you used your position to save Irish lives, to change the dynamic between our peoples. My cousin would have been proud. The combined forces transformed the settlement's defensive capabilities. Eric and Cormac worked together on strategy, their different approaches to warfare complementing each other. Norse direct strength combined with Irish tactical flexibility. Freda found herself translating not just words but military concepts, helping bridge the gap between two different fighting traditions. Ragnar's attack came on a gray morning with fog rolling off the water. 80 warriors, exactly as intelligence had predicted. They expected to find a vulnerable settlement defended by overmatched forces. Instead, they found unified resistance that hit them from 3 directions simultaneously. The battle was brutal. Freda stayed in the longhouse with the other non-combatants, listening to the sounds of violence outside and praying to gods from both her heritages. Please, please let Eric survive. Please let this not be the end of everything we've built. It lasted 3 hours. Then slowly, impossibly, the sounds changed. Victory shouts instead of combat cries. When Eric appeared in the doorway, covered in blood but alive, Freda ran to him without thinking, threw herself into his arms despite the gore, despite the people watching, despite everything. It's over, he said against her hair. Ragnar's dead. His surviving warriors surrendered. It's over. The bomb. Aftermath took weeks to sort through. Ragnar's men were given choices: join Eric's settlement under new terms that prohibited raiding, return to their homes if they had them, or face judgment for specific crimes. Most chose integration. A few chose departure. None chose judgment, which told its own story about their certainty of guilt. The Irish delegation stayed for a formal assembly where new agreements were drafted, not just trade terms, but mutual defense pacts, cultural exchange programs, even discussion of intermarriage between settlements to strengthen bonds. The world was changing, slowly, imperfectly, but genuinely. One evening, 2 months after the battle, Freda found herself back at the harbor with Eric, the same spot where she'd contemplated running, where he'd told her he loved her. Everything felt different now. Lighter, more possible. Brianna had her baby, Freda said. A girl. Healthy. She sent word through Cormac's network. Wanted us to know. That's good. Eric smiled. Real, tangible good that came from your impossible plan. Our impossible plan, Freda corrected. You're the one who chose to support it even knowing the risks. Because you made me believe risks were worth taking. Eric turned to face her fully. I've been thinking about something. The connecting door between our chambers. It's been unlocked for weeks now. Freda's heart picked up pace. It has. Maybe it's time we stop pretending we need separate chambers at all. Eric's voice was uncertain in a way she rarely heard from him. Maybe it's time we build an actual marriage instead of just a functional partnership. Are you asking me to truly be your wife? Freda asked softly. In every way, not just legal terms. I'm asking if you want that, if you're ready for it. There's no pressure. I meant what I said about your own chamber, about never forcing. She kissed him, cut off his anxious rambling with lips on his, hands in his hair, body pressed close. When they broke, apart, both breathing hard, she smiled against his mouth. Yes, I want that. I want all of it. The real marriage, the messy emotions, the risk of losing everything. I want to stop surviving and start living. Eric laughed, the sound full of relief and joy. My terrifying, brilliant, impossible wife. What would I do without you? Probably make much safer choices, Freda teased. Then serious again, but maybe less meaningful ones. They walked back to the longhouse together, hands linked, past the hall where they'd negotiated with Cormac, past the dock where she'd first arrived as property rather than person, past all the places that marked her transformation from thrall to translator to partner to wife in the fullest sense. That night, in a single chamber instead of two, with no locked doors between them, Freda lay beside Eric and thought about her mother, about survival and sacrifice and the long, slow journey from endurance to actual joy, about how the best revenge against those who'd tried to break you wasn't bitterness, but building something beautiful from the wreckage. What are you thinking? Eric murmured, half asleep. That my mother would have liked you, Freda said. That she would have been proud I found someone who sees strength in unexpected places, who believes in redemption, who chose hope even when hope seemed foolish. I think she'd be proud of you regardless of who you married, Eric replied, for becoming someone who saves others instead of just surviving, for changing the world instead of just enduring it. Outside, the settlement slept peacefully, Irish and Norse families living side by side, beginning to learn each other's languages and customs, children playing together without caring about which heritage they came from. It was small, fragile, but it was real. And in a chamber that used to feel like a prison of politeness, two people who'd started as strangers bound by necessity had become partners bound by choice, had become lovers, bound by genuine affection, had become the foundation of something new, something better. The daughter who'd been renegated had become the woman who'd been chosen, not because of bloodline or legitimacy or any external measure, but because she'd chosen herself first, had chosen to believe she deserved more than survival, had chosen to build meaning from pain and partnership from pragmatism. And that, Freda thought as sleep finally claimed her in Eric's arms, that was the truest freedom of all. Not rescue, not elevation, but the power to write your own story, even when the world tried to write it for you. The strength to define yourself instead of accepting definitions imposed by others. The courage to love despite knowing love came with risk of loss. Her mother had survived for 22 years. Freda would honor that survival by living fully for however many years she was given. by building bridges instead of walls, by choosing hope over bitterness, by proving that even the renegated could become essential, that even the broken could heal, that even the impossible could become real if you were brave enough to try. Freda's journey reminds us that freedom isn't something given, it's something claimed, piece by painful piece, through choices that terrify us and risks that could destroy us. She could have stayed silent, kept her head down, accepted that survival as a thrall was better than no survival at all. But she chose differently. She chose to speak when silence was safer. She chose to trust when betrayal seemed inevitable. She chose to love when loss felt certain. And in doing so, she didn't just save herself, she changed the entire world around her. So ask yourself, when faced with impossible choices, would you choose safety or meaning? Would you accept the limitations others place on you? Or would you redefine what's possible? Would you survive? Or would you truly live? Sometimes the people who save us aren't heroes riding in with perfect solutions. Sometimes they're broken individuals carrying their own guilt, offering imperfect partnerships built on honesty instead of romance. Eric didn't rescue Freda with grand gestures. He gave her a chance to rescue herself. And maybe that's what real love looks like. Not sweeping someone off their feet, but standing beside them while they find their own footing. Not erasing their past, but helping them build a future that honors it. Not demanding they be whole, but choosing to heal alongside them, scars and all. If this story moved you, if Freda's strength inspired you, if Eric's redemption gave you hope that people can change, then share this journey with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button to let us know these stories matter. Subscribe so you never miss tales of courage, transformation, and the unstoppable power of choosing yourself, even when the world tries to choose for you. Because every person who hears Freda's story is another person who might find the courage to write their own. And that's how we change the world, one brave choice at a time.